Jewels from the Sea. A Life by the Sea. On their windswept island off the coast of eastern Africa, the women of Zanzibar were living much as their ancestors had. They cared for their children and cultivated their gardens. They farmed seaweed from the ocean and gathered shells to sell to tourists who visited their beautiful homeland. Some of the women worked long hours, breaking rocks into gravel. Life on the Fumba Peninsula had often been hard for them. They made very little money, and some would say the women were impoverished, but they had always managed to feed their families. The ocean had provided for them, supplying abundant fish and oysters for food and colorful shells to sell. However, gifts from the ocean were not limitless. In the early 2000s, the women began to notice that oysters were not as plentiful as they had once been. In fact, Zanzibar's oysters were being harvested faster than they could replenish themselves. In 10 short years, the number of oysters had declined dramatically. The women worried about the uncertain future. A fresh approach. The women began to look beyond the solitude of their isolated coastal villages for help. To start, they welcomed the interest of scientists who were studying marine life in the waters surrounding Zanzibar. With guidance from the scientists, the women would work together to manage the way oysters were harvested. They soon discovered they had the power to bring oyster populations back to healthy levels. Caption: The lustrous interior of an oyster shell. The women's search for solutions also unearthed another new idea. The women had always discarded the oyster's shells after removing the flesh. But visiting experts who help communities sustain their resources pointed out that the shells could be valuable too. They offered to teach the women the skills needed for polishing the shells and turning them into jewelry. Before long, local residents and tourists were buying earrings, necklaces, and bracelets that the women made from shells. The income the women earned from selling jewelry was more than they had ever made before. It occurred to them that with a little ingenuity, they had actually become businesswomen. Building on their success, the women believed they could do even more. They wanted to have control of their business, not to be like a sharecropper who owns no land and so keeps only a part of the harvest. It was suggested that they join forces to cultivate mabe pearls, also known as half pearls. These pearls are created when a bead or other irritant is placed inside a living oyster. The oyster coats the irritation with layers of shiny substance called nacre. The nacre later hardens into a shimmering pearl, perfectly suited for jewelry. This new project would also work well with the plans to restore the oyster beds. 4 no-take zones were soon established for the oysters that would produce mabe pearls. There was only one problem. The pearls had to be cultivated underwater. Even though the women had lived all their lives by the sea, they did not know how to swim. Caption: The women are harvesting oysters. The next step for these strong-willed women was to learn to swim. Others in the village were impressed by the women's determination. Many joined them to help them see the project through. The first harvest of mabe pearls in 2008 was so successful that professional jewelers quickly bought up the gleaming harvest to make expensive jewelry. Toward new horizons, the women wanted to learn still more ways to improve their business. To do so, they would have to travel thousands of miles across the ocean. Just as learning to swim had been a first, leaving Zanzibar would be a new experience. But together they would go. In 2009, a small group flew to Newport, Rhode Island, in the U.S. to learn about designing and marketing jewelry. They met a master jeweler who taught them how to wrap strands of fine silver wire into delicate designs around the mabe pearls. They also met people who shared tips on expanding small businesses into large ones. The women absorbed all this and brought it home with them. The women of Zanzibar still live on their beautiful island, but today there is a difference. By working together, the women have become powerful caretakers of local natural resources and created prosperity in their community. Their hard-earned productivity will continue when they teach the next generation of young women how to accomplish great things. Caption: one of the women polishes a mabe shell.